Incorporated. Welcome you all to the session, what educators have to say about Wisconsin's teacher crisis, quote unquote. So just so you know, in terms of like style, figured it's because even though we're in a very big and beautiful room, this is a decent sized group that we could have, we'll have chances to have kind of turn and talk, small group discussions, breakouts, just chances where we can really interact with each other. But why don't we get started with just the folks on the panel. So if you want to introduce your name, pronouns, your role in the education system, how long you've been there, and maybe if you want to share what keeps you going during these times.
And that last one, that's the hard question. My name is Jessica Hotz. I'm a history teacher at Madison East High School. I've been there, I think this is my 15th year. I'm also the board of directors of MTI. She, her, hers.
Hi, I'm Heather Hansen. My pronouns are she, her, hers. Sorry, do you want to jump in?
No, go ahead. I did forget last.
You're just giving.
I
didn't want to answer
that.
that. I am going into my 25th year at South Milwaukee School District. I'm a social studies and film studies teacher. I'm also a South Milwaukee Education Association representative for the last 4 decades. This is 10. And I'm also a GSA advisor at South Milwaukee. I'm also not going to answer that last part quite yet.
Okay.
Just take some time to mull it about.
Yeah, it's a tough one.
This is what I will say about that one. I think one of the only things that keeps me in education lately, in the last few years at least, is my involvement in my union. Because I feel that that is one of the only places we have enough voice to push something forward that could make things better. And I think without that hope and those steps forward, it would be much easier. I'm really stubborn, that's partially it too. But without the hope that something's going to improve, which for me only comes from my union lately, I would probably be less likely to be still in education.
I would double up on that, and I would also just say teachers and educators in the classroom. Getting strength from the people, just like was mentioned previously, like looking to your left, looking to your right. Now sometimes that's really hard lately because you look at the beginning of the year to your left and you look to your right, and then at the end of the year, a lot of those people are gone. Right? So it can be really challenging with that turnover rate, and that's obviously what we're here to talk about. But finding strength in educators and finding strength in each other. That's really, and that comes through our union work, and it also just comes from teachers and educators finding each other in the ways that we best know how.
So before we start, just also thought it'd be good to get a temperature of the room. How many folks in this space are either active educators or aspiring educators? And when I say educators, I mean you work at a school. It doesn't matter. For me personally, I phrase educator as any adult who's walking in the building in the service of kids. Do we have any active educators in this space? All right. Put up your hand up high. Do we have any retired educators? No. Who led the way for us to still even have spaces that we can use. Do we have active board members? Do we have any school board members? All right. Do we have any active, do we have any active legislators or politicians or people who serve positions who serve their government or serve their community? Really appreciating seeing 3 assembly Dems in this space trying to work, especially since I actually remember when one of them was a student, which makes me feel good. And do we have any caregivers, parents, folks who have either kids in the district, in schools, or are dedicated as part of groups to try to make their schools a better place. Was there anyone that I missed? Legislative. Well, serving their community, still serving their community. Yeah. Hey Heather, did you want us to sing happy birthday to you?
No.
So, first kind of want to start by just asking both of you simply, what got you into the education system in the first place, or what made you feel like you could move in this space, and what has been the biggest, I guess, change that you've observed, over, whether you want to say from Act 10 or even just since you started, because some things even preceded Act 10, or, what are things what has been the biggest change or the biggest adjustment you feel like you've had to make?
I think the first part of your question was a little bit about like what brought us into education. So I'm another one of those people who's fortunate enough to have grown up in my district, and right when I graduated from college, I went back. And there are many of us in my district. And so that was like a really wonderful experience, right? And also kind of a challenge. Like you've got people who taught you 4 years ago and now they're your colleagues. My neighbor was my student. It can all be very, challenging in that way, but it was a wonderful way to like reaffirm that I knew that I wanted to really do this as a profession. I think we're probably about the same age and started teaching at the same time. So very shortly into my career, like 9/11 happened. And there were a lot of challenges in terms of our students and our student population around that. But I would say the biggest challenge going into my 25th year, it has absolutely been Act 10 and the ramifications of it. But I think it's very interesting how people define what those challenges are. Because I do think that frequently when we talk about Act 10 and we talk about collective bargaining, like the common conversation goes to money and it goes to funding, and that is huge. That's a huge problem. Like we all know that. But there are so many other things that can be done to stop the teacher exodus. So very many. Besides obviously continuing to advocate for full funding for our schools. So I would say there has been a major shift I would say it's the deprofessionalizing of teaching. And it's the loss of autonomy and the loss of being treated as experts in our field.
Could you give an example just in terms of, I know that sometimes when we talk about deprofessionalism, sometimes, for those who aren't in the classroom.
Right, that's hard.
It's hard to contextualize. Is there like a example that you or Jessica could provide that where something you've noticed that used to be something that was within your locus of control or professionalism that has now been taken away from you or changed?
I was just trying to think of that as you were saying. It's maybe easier for me to think of the now, but thinking back, and I agree with the deprofessionalization. Sometimes I think of it more as teacher voice. You have a voice and next to nothing. Definitely autonomy. We are much more monitored every minute of the day. I was welcomed into a school, a very special school, where people just collaborated by themselves. Like people collaborated because they respected each other and so forth. You didn't need to tell them to sit in a room and do it. And honestly, I feel distinctly that since we put them in rooms and say, hey, you do this, fill out this form, there's been less collaboration. Or the collaboration is much less meaningful. And I think that is a really hardcore, easy one. I think as far as what some of these kinds of things do is they inherently, even if not intentionally, just try to take the teacher out of education. Like, you're not important, you just do what we tell you. And there's a long history of that throughout education that has to do with all sorts of things, like treating teachers who are predominantly female, like they're 16-year-old girls in the 1850s. But, which I just think we're getting worse at, personally. But it's the idea of us knowing what is best for the kid in our room, and the groups of kids in our rooms, and people not trusting us with that. And consequently, and this was said to me a number of years ago by someone that is no longer in the classroom but still in education, who I respect immensely, it comes down to, I think on some level, we don't necessarily trust the district to do what's right by people, because they're not listening to us. And they're not in that classroom. They don't know those kids. They don't talk to the parents as much as we do. This isn't to say that this is intentional or anything like that, but when teachers are taken out of the discussion, whether it's in bargaining or in collaboration or in planning, curriculum, you name it, which I've seen all of those things suffer, I forgot where I was going. The trust goes. The trust goes. But you're also like, oh, you're not good anymore. You're not good enough to do this, so we're going to tell you. And that is incredibly demoralizing. I don't use the word burnout. There are books that say burnout is a totally different thing. What we're seeing in teaching is demoralizing, because we're seeing more and more, because there's still a teacher's voice, the next initiative that comes down and somebody wrote a book may not actually fit in with what we know to be right for our kids. And this whole idea that, oh, somebody read a book, a bunch of people are reading it in district offices, I'm from a big district, and therefore we're doing it. Whereas you get a bunch of teachers reacting to this, you might see some negative ideas, you might see some positive ideas, but you're going to see the troubleshooting. Oh, that's not going to work with this. This is inherently contradictory to this philosophy. Are you saying that's gone too? And therefore you're basically demeaning all the teachers in every bit of work. We've been through all sorts of grading policy changes that we had essentially no, and I know this is true across the country, true. We had no input on, and psychologically mess with kids in a way that hurts other aspects of them learning. And these are things that immediately come to mind with if you actually get a teacher in a classroom who works with kids every day, recognizing it, oh, well, what will be the motivation to do this? Whereas, oh, doesn't matter, you're gonna do it.
Yeah, I mean, I think that you spoke really beautifully to all of that. The idea that the freedom to, and I'm a high school teacher, we're high school, so it also I think is a very different world when we look at different levels. I do think high school teachers have a little bit more freedom when it comes to curriculum and development versus elementary. I would say frequently people who make decisions about curriculum get edu-marketed, right? They're sold supplies at a conference. They're sold the magic thing that is gonna fix the test score, right? And that, obviously we all understand the report card is the report card. The school report cards are a big deal because they decided they were a big deal. And so what happens then is there is not a lot of control that a teacher can have. I know I've experienced conversations or even repping people who had put in a letter of, reprimand or a plan of improvement that they literally on a certain day were not on the same lesson as the person who was teaching next door. For those of you who have children, they didn't all start walking on the same day. They didn't start talking on the same day, right? Kids aren't widgets. And so to treat teachers in that fashion, right? And to not be able to have those, again, that's taking their professional expertise, knowing when your babies need a break, knowing when, right, we've got to step away from the hard stuff to the soft stuff to the SEL, however you want to talk about it, that's what teachers do best. We know our kids the best. And it's been unfortunate to see that sometimes that's weaponized against folks. And then I would also say that idea of canned curriculums. We've seen such a reduction in young people going into teaching and the erosion of credentials required to become a qualified educator in the state of Wisconsin, very rapidly. And so when you've got people, and this is no cut on anybody who's gone through those programs, but it is rather different than traditional programs. There's a lot of questions. There's not as much training. There's not as much field work. And what happens in those situations is, yeah, you're giving somebody this program and it makes you feel good in that moment. But you're not really learning your skill and developing yourself as an educator. And what happens then is, all you do is rely on that. Give me the thing, give me the thing. And then you're not an educator. Then you're just like a conduit for a product, right? Like so I see that as also it's like exemplified since at time and so few young people are going into the profession that it frequently looks like it's welcome. Like, well, we have teachers ask us for this stuff. And it's like, well, we gotta attack the bigger issue of like, when is that helpful? Because it can be. And then when do we actually need to like differentiate for our staff?
So, to piggyback off of that, one thing that I've noticed, especially, so I've been president for 3 years, so I'm not in just one school. I'm going to a lot of schools, and when I talk to younger educators, emergency licensed folks, you know, a lot of times what really stresses them out is the lack of support or mentorship in those spaces, and sometimes when it comes to like affirmation, that you are doing the right thing, even if the kid or caregiver might not agree, or even if someone disagrees, like having confidence in what you're doing. Also, the chance to actually just share space and discuss it, and not in a, you know, rote, we gotta fill out this form sort of way and check off this box, but actually in a way that recognizes like humanity. As veteran teachers, who both of you are when you are working, well, we're also seeing, one thing I've also seen is younger educators not talk about this as a career, but more as a 3 to 4 year plan before they move on to something else. You know, maybe to pay the bills or to requirements of their tuition, and then they're gonna go work for Epic or Exact Sciences or whomever, or work remotely, especially since COVID, where they can work internationally, remotely from their home. So as the job market and the culture around that has changed, what are the conversations you've been hearing or having with younger educators who are kind of on that precipice of like, maybe I stay, maybe I go, you know, maybe I am feeling burnt out, or this is not good for my mental health, which I think every educator encounters, you know, since we've had education, but there used to be, or there tended to be systems or people that used to be able to help people in those situations. Are there things, maybe that's a little leading, but in your respective spaces, does that conversation happen? Are there things that have worked that you think have helped people stick around, or are there things that you know after the fact when they're leaving, you're like, this could have been really helpful, and now I'm off to this job or this career?
I think the mandatory meetings have driven young staff out. They're so prescribed. Knowing that, okay, I have this meeting, I get 2 prep periods a whole week. And I've had years like that too. But doing that to new teachers when they need the organic talk between their colleagues who do maybe the same job, but don't have to like, oh, we have to do this, we have to decide what we're doing in February now. That's not what's gonna back them up. Again, I just keep going back, and maybe it was an unusual situation. My department was incredibly warming when I entered, and I was one of the newer teachers that had been there for a while. And again, all that mentoring happened, but not because anybody told anybody to do it, but also because those veteran teachers had the time to do it because they weren't in as many meetings either. So, I mean, letting us do our jobs to some extent is going to give us ownership. We know from HR information for decades that you give people autonomy, they're going to be happier in their jobs. If you give people autonomy, they're going to be more creative in their jobs. We need more creativity in jobs, in this job right now. Nobody has some of the answers, particularly with COVID stuff. Nobody has every answer for everything, and we're never going to because circumstances are going to change. I do believe education in some ways stays the same, but there are surface things that really do change. Like, how do we do with the cell phone phenomenon? Give people room to dabble and to figure it out themselves and take ownership of that rather than have somebody, oh, you're going to do it this way. Because even if that works, they have no ownership in that. And a lot of the people that I've seen leave, it has been respect from administration, largely. Whether it's a big district or a small district, or it's like, oh, they're making me do this committee, this thing, I can't keep up on the top of trying to develop my own stuff, which is what I want to do, let's say. I'm being set up to fail. And we are setting people up to fail. It's amazing we have people that stay in these jobs. Because we've all seen so many people go. But we're setting staff up to be miserable and to fail our students. So every time we talk about doing what's best for students, we need to add and staff. And by that I mean anybody that works with a kid in a building. Particularly teaching staff, but also like SNAs, school psychs, school social workers, all of those folks. I'm not necessarily talking about admin in this particular case. While they're educators, there's a difference.
Yeah, their learning conditions are working conditions, so like you can't have one, we can't champion one without championing the other. No decisions about us without us.
Right.
I think it's been a unique situation for me, being a union leader and rep, having lots of conversations with people who have left the profession or left our district. And money is usually last. I mean, I think a lot of people in this room know that. Like, we can all point at that as like, that's the thing. Of course, like, we all deserve much more in education than what we're receiving. However, it's the other pieces that have driven out talented educators in my experience. And sometimes, like, you do an exit interview as far as, like, if there's HR people in the room, and they'll be like, well, your exit interview, like, they said it was because their spouse got a new job, or they said it was because this, or they said it. That means they don't trust you. They're not telling you the truth. Like, they're telling us the truth. They're afraid. There are people who are afraid that if they bring up these concerns, or they have gotten dinged for something, that they're not even going to say it in the exit interview, or ask for that help because they're terrified of being pushed out, having somebody else be put into their place. They don't want a negative conversation between an administrator and a prospective employer, so they just keep quiet about it. And so like, it's just like anything with like how we have relationships with our kids, like if you expect honesty from people, you have to have trust, and trust is earned. And that there's really just been such an erosion of that over the years, particularly since Act 10. But I tend to like, I send out surveys all the time. I've asked people just this last week leading up to this summit, especially folks who had left for a different district or retired early, because that's another issue. That's like a whole other issue besides the mass exodus, which kudos to all of you who left right after 10. Brilliant move. I know you wanted to stay, and that's admirable, but you did the right thing. But there are so many people who are leaving the second they get out, right? You hit 55 or you hit that magic number, or 57, how many years you have, and they're like, I'm gonna start a second career, I'm gonna do something else because it is untenable to continue. So I've just seen more young people go into it and be like, I did not think it was going to be like this. I did not think that my time was going to be used in this fashion. I don't feel like, I literally am looking at a survey response right now. I was like, I wasn't teaching. I was just delivering. And there's a difference. And it was heartbreaking. So people leave to work for places like WPEN. People leave for other positions in districts where they can maybe have a little bit more creativity in a bigger district. I think all of those things, but as we talk so much and heard so much in the morning about money and funding, yes, it is critical, we all agree with that. But there, again, I just want to hit home, there are so many things that we can do in our buildings day to day to help educators stay. The young ones, the newer ones to the profession, and you need your veterans. You need your veterans. Those are the folks who are helping cultivate, helping provide that guidance, helping grow that organic educator community.
So I'm gonna just kind of chime in on two things. One, one of the things I've especially appreciated in the last few years with the union leadership role is what money communicates.
Yes.
So like money in of itself as a number is it, but the value we attach to it, especially, you know, as inflation, given the cost of living, especially if you're in Wisconsin where the cost of living is going up significantly, especially if you're in certain areas like Madison or in the suburbs where the cost of living is even outpacing even inflation. When you are given an offer of a 0% raise, even if the district's rationale is reasonable in that, hey, we don't have the money, it still communicates something as all this work that you've put in, you're not worth it. You're not worth moving along. And that has been something I have learned in terms of like some people, you know, a lot of workers that I've talked to, they don't talk about just like, hey, it's gonna be really tough to pay my bill. It's like, this is what my boss thinks of me. This is, and because public education is run by the public, ideally, you know, my school board, it's usually parents, caregivers, former educators, people who spend a lot of time, invest a lot of time, not for the title, but because they genuinely care about the community. The same thing with administrators, but that's what they think of me. Like, that's usually the response I get when I'm bringing like a below rate offer, is that they're like, oh, that's what they think of me. They said all these nice things, they got me donuts in May, but they think I'm not worth it. And that's a conversation that is a really difficult piece to have just once. And I feel like sometimes when I've seen like successful administrators and board members have that, be able to like have those conversations, those tough conversations, it's because they have those conversations in September, November, January, March, so that when the offer comes and it is frankly insulting in April or May, they can be like, well, this person is in constant contact with me. If you hear nothing from your leaders from now until the next time it comes up, then it comes off as that's the only way they're communicating to me is through this dollar amount. And so we have to call that out, one as a function of like capitalism in terms of whether or not that's actually fair, but also, you know, if we're gonna do this thing where it's like, it's a calling, it's you know, we only tend to call certain things callings when we expect to underpay them. Or treat them poorly. Like I full disclosure, I went to Catholic schools, K through 12, right? University of Wisconsin-Madison was the first public school I ever attended. I heard a lot about calling when it came to like people joining the priesthood, because it was about a vow of poverty. So it was like, or if you're gonna be a nun, like, it was like you take a vow of poverty. Well, you take a vow of poverty because it's a calling. And we tend to talk about education like that, we tend to talk about nursing like that, we tend to talk about motherhood like that. And I say this to all the guys in the room, like, we specifically benefit from it because it's expected to, we exist in spaces where it's expected that you know, we get the exception, right? They hear our voices. So as men, we gotta be, or male identifying, we gotta be able to like call that shit out, because education has never been properly funded, because it has always been assumed that it will be staffed by women who we can discard once they get pregnant or married. And then we can, you know, I mean, it's not so long ago, this district that we're in, that's like one of the most progressive districts in the country, was firing women because they got pregnant. You know, that was a lawsuit that was settled in the 80s. That's not like some sort of 1850s bullshit. And that still happens. When people get surplus, I've had experiences where someone, you know, the worker is going to a new school, but the principal rejected them because they're like, I'm pregnant, so I'm gonna be having my kid presumably in October, which means I'm gonna be out until December, and the principal says, I don't want you to come here, can we find someone else? I've had that conversation. It's come in my union office, it has come through that space. And usually it's not that, you know, and I've seen that from male and female principals, so that's not just like dudes being dudes and not getting it. Because from an administrative standpoint, they're like, crap, I gotta get a sub. And getting a sub is like finding water in the desert. nowadays. So like, I get the additional workload, but that communicates something when you have that conversation.
Well, and school systems are hierarchical, they're
Yeah.
hierarchical in nature,
Yes.
so it doesn't matter who's like, I mean, it does, but it doesn't like matter who's at the helm necessarily, like, because it's so entrenched in that, right? Like, unless we really change how school districts are run, how we operate, like there's things we can do to reimagine it, like, the chance that somebody's gonna fall, like, they might not even realize that they are being biased in that, you know what I mean, Michael? Like, that's exactly what you said, so like, the system itself breeds that patriarchal thinking.
And we reinforce paradoxes all the time. So one of the things I will say, just because being on this panel and being in this position, being a person of color, I'm Black and I'm Asian, is when I talk to young, especially when there are well-intended pushes to say, I want my school district, I want my school building to look like the kids, I want the staff to look like the kids who are serving them, which is something we can all agree on. We want a diverse workforce that improves our community. There's enough data to show that's true. But what happens is like, okay, our issue is not bringing folks of color in to hire them. Our issue, what I have seen, is retaining them. And then when we underpay them, what we are saying essentially is, I want you here because you're Black and this is a majority Black classroom in a majority Black neighborhood because our city is hella segregated. Or you're Latino or Latina and our district, or Hmong, and our district it has these pockets. But when you ask for a raise, aren't you here for the right reasons? Because you love the kids so much, because you want to have a kid be a teacher, you want to inspire kids to be just like you. So then it's weaponized against people of color to stay in those positions, to be underpaid. So we want to bring them in, but we don't want to pay them, or we don't want to listen to them, because a lot of times, and this is just to mirror exactly what Jessica and Heather have said, is when they have said, hey, culturally speaking, I want to be able to express myself in this way where this pedagogy or this curriculum goes nowhere near, and I want to be able to use the praxis of me being, queer, or me being Black, or me being non-binary. But the curriculum doesn't allow that, so now you're dinged, you're punished for not being able to express your true identity. But we want you to be able to express your true identity when we want to use your picture on the school website or for PR. And that is the danger of then when we say, hey, we want to elevate voices of color, because then naturally every person of color that I've spoken to in that space, and I say this, I also own this as a union side too, we do this, is, am I being tokenized? Am I being used as a tool to just promote someone else's agenda, as opposed to actually being recognized for the value I bring to the space?
And even when that agenda could potentially hurt the people that are the population there. I mean, we had a great, fairly new English teacher who was a woman of color, and she left mid-year because the dumbing down of the curriculum in order to get grades up looking like a certain way so the district's numbers can look better was the concern, not actually teaching populations and giving them equal treatment.
And I say this with all love in my heart for administrators and people trying to do the right thing. A lot of times, even these things I disagree with, or my union disagrees with, are not because we see administration as evil or nefarious. But I want to say 5 years ago, the district changed its surplus policy and firing policy when it came to not just looking at seniority. And I was one of the only people of color on the union side bringing up the fact that, because their big promotional point was, this is a way that we can retain staff of color in those spaces. And my point was that when I've looked at the data that shows that actually people younger and staff of color tend to be the ones who get drummed out the most if you give administrators more power in the decision-making process, whether it's UW-Milwaukee, Michigan State University, Chicago, when CPS tried this back in the 90s, what happens is you have white savior administrators trying to drum out staff of color, or you have black male principals drumming out black women because of misogyny. And then when we bring that up, like as, hey, this seems to be an issue where they seem to be targeting certain folks, then like it's like, oh, well, you don't like this admin because you're being really mean, or sometimes it is, sometimes it's our own people, like sometimes it is a person of color, sometimes it is like folks like that, and then when so like to be able to have that conversation about like, does this actually meet the goals of what we're trying to get to, like we have to have more honest conversations, as opposed to the conversations that we think will play well in the newspapers or with the larger community. And that's kind of where like a disingenuous conversation can lead other people to leave. I've seen staff of color leave because they've been drummed out by their administrators who are trying to explain black excellence to them, like white women explaining black excellence to black teachers. Like I've been in meetings where administrators have tried to explain to me black excellence, which then my response is always, just to remind you, I am black and I am excellent. So like, I don't know where the fuck you're coming from, like talking to me like this, but let's go here if you're gonna talk about it like this. And that's not to like brag, but that's just to say, that's a conversation that we're having, even in progressive districts, even in districts where we are trying to do the right thing. So like, what can we do? I mean, we got about 20 minutes left. What can we do as a community to talk about the retention piece? So I want to ask you this question, and then I'm going to ask people to get into groups. You're all adults here. You can probably just find people in similar type of space. Because regardless of money, like money is off the table. Paying people is off the table. Until our new, less gerrymandered districts and our assembly legislators and our Senate and our Supreme Court can actually talk about adequately funding public schools. What is one move that does not require money that could happen in your district that would help with retention from day one?
Stop the lying and stop the gaslighting. Because this whole idea of, oh yeah, we want you as, we want our teaching, groups to look like our students. Don't say you value them so much and not give them voice. And that's true for all teachers. Like, oh, thank you for what you do. I hate that phrase because it does nothing to acknowledge what I do. It does nothing to say that you even know what I do. And this is one particular coming from admin. When it's coming from community members, I know that's not really the deal. But like when it's coming from admin and just always, thank you for all you do. Bullshit. They don't thank us for all we do. They don't like a lot of what we do because we clearly do everything wrong and the next initiative has to actually come in. But you're not going to listen to us when we bargain for what's best for our kids, or we want to bargain for what's best for our kids. And we get a lot of lies. Oh, whether it's school boards or whatever, we want what's best, but we're not going to treat you well, we're not going to pay you well, we're not going to acknowledge problems. Just even sometimes in PR and districts will fail to acknowledge a very, very real thing that is a problem that is being fully seen by staff and students alike. Oh, that's not a thing. That's not a thing. All the bathrooms in the district look this way, and this isn't an issue for, non-gendered bathrooms. No, you can't take away the experiences of the people that are day-to-day in the building, whether it is the students or any other faculty or staff. They have to listen. Admin needs to open up their doors and listen, and don't tell us we're doing great if you're going to come around and then say you're not going to listen to us. If we're great, we deserve being listened to. Then we have something valuable that could help you do your job better. We don't want to be constantly griping about things. We want to be able to have a conversation, say, okay, this is what you'd like to do. Okay, but this part will not work because scheduling does this and whatever. We want to have those conversations where we don't have to kind of behind the scenes go, yeah, we knew that wasn't going to happen. We would rather be a part of figuring out how it could happen in a way that makes it better for everybody. But just shutting teachers down, not treating them like they have any education or any experience, it's killing it. It's where the trust fails. If, oh, thank you for what you do, but thank you for what you do, but why is there any trust there? There's not gonna be any trust there.
I guess, like, to simplify things, I feel like time is something that you can give, and that can look so many different ways for so many different people. Like, I know some of my friends who are young parents, and like, having to leave, you know, a meeting early, and you get looked at, or you're gonna have to figure out your childcare, and you're gonna have to do these things, and instead of being creative in how we could actually do meetings, like, many of us taught through COVID. Like, educators are immensely creative, we're flexible, we change and make so many decisions based on so many people's needs. Like, let us get creative instead of making everybody, like, have to say to the same script to make it fair, because that's your version of fair. That's actually not the version of fair that exists in the world. So time, like, don't make me fill out the form when I meet with a colleague. Let us have the organic conversation. If there's issues that come up, then those are conversations building principals should be having with teachers. They should be checking in with them anyway. Like, it shouldn't feel like it has to be this process. So like, that time, and with that time that means freedom, to look at it, like, what do I want to develop? Where do I see myself, like, best, like, growing this year with my students, and being able to choose those things, and not feeling like you have to, like, report it, or that a sheet of paper is going to be pushed across the table during your EE meeting. Besides time, and I guess I can link this to time for people who have the power to make decisions, to actually let teachers help make those decisions. I think there should be a union president or a union rep on every school board in the state of Wisconsin. Like, that should just be an automatic. You have people who are admin, you have, and they have important things to say. They're leaders of the district. That is crucial. But why is there no teacher on there? No active classroom teacher? Like, that is a problem. Because then you get the dog and pony show, where it's the same few people that get pulled out every single time that want to say, hey, here's all the great stuff. And there is great stuff. And I'm not dissing the people that get pulled out from the front, because sometimes they're like, I have to do this thing. But you're not hearing those authentic voices, and then your school boards only get like a certain edition of what's happening. As a Gov teacher, you know, I teach my students that, like, power is frequently just who's closest to the people who make the decisions. So if you never have your teachers, your classroom teachers, your paras, your secretaries, your food service workers, your custodians, your security folks, if they're never having conversations, real authentic ones with the board and with admin present, you're not getting a real version of what's happening. And it just seems, I mean, again, it's the hierarchical system at play, but like, it's wild to me that we don't have, it can be a non-voting member, but like, there should be a teacher representative who is chosen by the elected group of people that represent that bargaining unit, whatever it might be. That's a first step, costs no money.
I think the only thing I would add on both of your, like, because both of what you said are very true and real and wise and doable. I would say if there's ways we can be more intentional about the language we use around each other when we are in space, because we are having conversations with each other. But a lot of times we tend to, I know I'm guilty of this, we tend to weaponize other folks against each other. And we use our kids most of all when we do this. Oh, it's best for kids. Don't you realize this is what's best for kids? And if we really dig deep, it's really what's best for me, or what's best for my ego, or what's best for my constituency, as opposed to like really like understanding kids are a very diverse group that have diverse needs. They, you know, there are certain things that they all need and deserve, but there are also things where it's like, if we just say it's for the kids, you can get a lot of shit passed by saying it's for the kids and sneaking it by that has nothing to do with the kids. And also being able to call each other out. So like when we need to have really important and difficult conversations around race, gender, identity, those sort of things, we aren't using it as a means to just say, my job is to get rid of you, or my job is to shut you down, but my job is to make sure you understand where I'm coming from so we can get along. If you can't get along, then we will deal with that, but like also, we gotta give each other the benefit of the doubt and positive intent that people are working their ass off. Otherwise, we wouldn't be doing this. Like, there's no amount of money in the world that can keep people like in this sort of space, unless they're feeling respected in conversations in community with each other. And we gotta build those communities up. Like, we can't assume that they're happening, because they're not. They're not in a lot of spaces.
Yeah.
So we got about,
Organically.
we got about 10 minutes left, so I don't know if we can do a small group. I'm wondering, we've been doing a lot of talking at you. Are there questions or are there things, comments that you have from your experiences that you'd like to bring into the space for the group? Yes, and if you could introduce yourself, maybe your role in education.
My name's Mary Yank. I'm from Franklin. I'm a one-year board member. So I think one of the most surprising things to me, I went to 3 years worth of board meetings. Sometimes I was the only person in the audience. And I was shocked and still remain a little uncomfortable with the, not animosity, but at least adversarial perception of unions. Because, again, I hate to say thank you for what you do. I'm a social worker. So I'm right there with that whole, it's your passion, but don't expect to get paid a lot. So like, is there a template for a district that has a teacher, I have so many questions, but I'm trying to figure out one that's meaningful, that has a teacher, an educator, a union person who attends a board meeting and is part of that? Is there a template for that?
There are
And is it
districts
good?
that do it. I know that there are districts that do it.
And it's
I
helpful and
can't
it's-
speak to templates, but.
But it helps and it's something, because I'm gonna take some of this stuff to, administration, and I'm just wondering what the best thing is for me to ask for.
Right, I mean, I would just say that it needs to be somebody who is chosen by your Franklin EA.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? Like, you want it to be a democratic representation, you don't want it to be somebody who's selected because of their relationship with admin and is going to be able to give, the filtered version of whatever it is. That would be the only.
But as a school board member, I don't know all the ins and outs. We know what we're told from,
Right.
And we know there are certainly situations where districts don't tell the board everything, and all those, the communication breaks down with it.
Can I ask, does anyone operate or exist in a district where maybe not a template, but there is staff or worker involvement at the board level?
I'm on our school board, small school board in western Wisconsin. We don't have one on our board per se, but we've always invited the union rep to be there, and she always is. And it's been great because if we've had some pertinent questions, she's right there to be a representative. And so we do reach out to her, which is fantastic.
I appreciate, so Cindy, right?
Yes.
Cindy, could you share which district you're at and which board you're on?
I'm from the Theological Temple School District, which is about 30 miles north of La Crosse.
Okay.
Just a kind of smaller school.
Well, I mean, if people have questions, maybe we can, maybe you find Cindy to talk about it, and also in terms of communicating out, because I think that could work, that could be helpful. Yes?
It's Carl Lovings, I'm from the Department of Public Instruction. So we released that educator prep program and workforce report, and we're looking at like that educator prep program piece as something that we sort of control or at least influence at the state level. When you think about those newer teachers are going to a traditional program, what could be maybe one of the more impactful things to think about those educator prep programs, including or for folks at DPI to be looking for when we approve those programs to better reflect maybe the conditions of schools today and really beyond?
I would say, just from my experience talking to younger folks, and it's something that I actually haven't, Jessica's on the MTI board, as is, so we have people in leadership positions in this space, but one of the things that I'm hoping to come out of the summit is actually be working with the heads of the teacher prep programs at UW and at Edgewood, where we we can have that conversation of, if we're talking about at Madison College, we're gonna talk about a consistent pipeline of there's so many conversations that get missed that I hear from early career educators about what the realities are, even if they're student teaching, even if they're in the school, like they don't know about their union. They don't know about how certain structures work or who to talk to if they have questions. They have voice. It is important that we understand that their voice is just as important as a 25-year vet. Now, the 25-year vet's voice might be imbued with less theory and more practicality, but that doesn't mean that, you know, our younger folks don't have things to bring into the experience. But I would love if DPI could talk about, like, have a space where it's like, how do you know your systems in the school, and what is your routing, what is your understanding? If you're not understanding it, how can we get you to understand it? Because that factors in so much into your day-to-day work, whether you are a classroom teacher, whether you're a social worker. Everyone's job is better enhanced when they actually have a better understanding of the system and things they want to change, and how ways they can change it without it being just like, I'm super pissed off, so I'm gonna say something on TikTok and then they get fired, as opposed to like, here's how I can actually advocate for this,
Like,
you know?
10 years ago, our association created a caucus of millennial educators. We called them Come Forward, as younger educators, and we did surveys, we had meetings, we did support sessions. Sometimes it was literally just the mentoring piece of like giving people space, but sometimes it was really like, how do I make a doctor's appointment through this portal? You know, like the very practical things that can like, that's your health, and that's a piece. And I think unions are crucial in that, because there's so much put on districts, and we need to be looked at as partners in that. I can tell you though, from that amazing experience of helping mentor a lot of the people in our Come Forward group, I think we had about 25, it was over 2 dozen, only 2 are still in education. So even a group where they felt very supported by their fellow teachers and educators and their union, and felt like, I'm giving you this information, like we had an 11-page report that we shared with administration with graphs and charts and all this kind of stuff, like, hey, you say you want to keep and retain, like you can't just say that you want to do that, you actually have to, like, to your point at the very beginning, the lying, the gaslighting, like, then you gotta actually follow through on it, because we lost so many of those extremely talented educators. So I think that's another piece of it, is putting power back into teachers together.
Yeah. The other thing I would say about teaching is teaching isn't just grabbing a decent or good lesson plan off the internet and doing it. We need to make sure, and I think one of the things that I think is really important when I mentor student teachers too, is you have to find your way to do it, because your way is not going to be my way. But you cannot be a really good teacher unless you know where you are grounded in that work. And that's going to look different. Some people can pull things off that other people can't, because of who they are, how they present themselves, whatever. It's about, so many different things. And to kind of let those templates, those other things, be there as a crutch or scaffolding, but then to pull back so that the kids so that the young professionals that get into education know, I'm going to be okay with whether there are these supports, or if I'm I think particularly for small school this, or whether I'm a little bit more on my own. But it's me. Because teaching is very grounded in your own personal philosophies, your own, who you are. And you can't be disingenuous in being a teacher. I firmly believe that. So doing it the way somebody else did it, maybe it'll work, maybe it won't. I think more often than not, it won't be as good as you could be if you grounded in who you are.
Do you mind if I weigh in on that a little bit? So
Could you introduce yourself?
Oh, hi, yeah. I'm Natasha Sullivan. I'm the Education Justice Center Coordinator with National Teachers Incorporated. I essentially deal with a lot of equity issues in our schools. One of the things I would say is that I would love to see some sort of course or training where we can teach educators how to advocate, how to advocate for their school, but also for themselves. I was a cooperating teacher for a few years, and a lot of what I taught my first year students was protect your time. Say no.
Yeah.
Say no. Like, your life is important. You can't pour, every parent knows, like, you can't pour from an empty cup. If you're not like doing okay, your kids are not doing okay. And stressing more of the relationships. This can be it's wild to me that we're surrounded by people all the time, and it can be so incredibly lonely and isolated. And if you don't find that network, if you don't find that support, you will burn out very quickly. And I think, and just one more kind of in my equity mindset, I've been asked to speak at UW-Madison to talk about supporting teachers of color who are coming up in the program, and it was clear they were looking for me to fix racism. I didn't that day. But a lot of it was just showing teachers of color how to cover their ass. Because when you're a person of color, particularly when you're a woman, and all those things are intersecting, what we don't want to talk about is how racism and sexism manifests in the classroom.
Yep.
How it manifests in our students. If I were a white male teacher, doors would have blown open for me. But the same attitude on me gets perceived very, very differently. So mostly what I talk to them about is how to document, how to record, how to cover your butt, because those are extra attacks that happen with people of color just when you're doing the job. God forbid you do it successfully. This is one of the weirdest professions I've ever been in, and wherein you can do well and almost get punished by it. Like you do really well with those kids. We'll give you 30 of them.
Yep.
You know? So networks, I think protecting your own mental health and having boundaries, I tell them to set boundaries. This is not your life. This is your career. It's really important.
Yes, and then I think because it's 10:55.
I'm sorry, I don't even wanna, so my name is Gretchen McKinney, I'm the certifying officer for the University of Wisconsin-Whitewater. I love everything that's being said, and I also wanna just layer in that I deal with these kids that are graduating and going out into the field. And I agree with everything that is said, and the support and the boundaries and saying no to all this. And I also wanna say that these kids their eyes are this big, the anxiety is up to the hill, they are trying to finish a degree, they are trying to get hired, they are figuring out where they're gonna live, they are paying off student loans. So to think that they should say no to things, I love the idea that they're trying to get hired. How do they find their people? How do they find their experienced people when they're scared to get into the classroom for the first time? So that beginning piece, I wish there was more. So, and without money, I wish there was more time for teachers to gather. But anyway, I just want to throw that in there because these kids are scary.
One thing that I've noticed, seeing the teacher at Madison, I came out of Madison, I teach in Madison, so I see Madison student teachers. Too many things that they're doing at once on the university level.
Yes.
Years ago, you kind of like, okay, you're student teaching now, you have almost no responsibilities. There's no other question. You don't have to take classes at the same time, and that really did a number on every, I've had people that student taught in this circumstance versus that circumstance. No, the ones later are too worried about, I think they just had TPA is gone.
No doubt.
But like, those things are just too much, because the full focus pretty much should be getting those supports from your program and whatnot, and some of that networking through your program, but not so many of the classes you learn more teaching than you do.
Correct.
I hate to cut people off, but we got, thank you.